Broadcasting from New Braunfels, Texas, home of the historic Green Hall and the best river tubing in America. You're listening to PX1 Sports Radio, where we cover the hottest topics in the sports gaming world and the world of sports entertainment. Here's your host, Mike Peters.
Welcome back once again. It is 2017. The new year is upon us. We're a little over a week into the new year. Hopefully everybody is sticking to their New Year's resolutions and on their way to a terrific year. As we've talked about, it's going to be a terrific year for sports gaming this year. And to kind of help kick off the new year, we've got a very special guest this week. He is the creative director of gameplay for the Madden franchise, and he's also kind of become the face of the Madden franchise over the last few years. He is Rex Dickson. Well, thanks for being here. A lot of the community, they have a lot of expectations and requests as far as what they think should go into the game and why things aren't in there. What can you tell us about the dev cycle as far as when does it start? How long do you guys go through that? And what are some of the challenges with that keeps you from doing some of the things you want to do?
Okay. There's a lot of big answers in there. It's extremely tough. The short dev cycle is actually a lot shorter than it seems because, you would assume, from the time Madden ships in August to the time we release again the following August next year, we have a full year of a dev cycle. That's actually not the case because when you consider, that we go through a bunch of patches and updates, so a lot of the team is actually working on 17 long after we ship. Inside of Madden Ultimate Team, we do continuous release model, so they're always just working on whatever's next versus the next game. And now with competitive gaming, I feel like we're even more aggressive in terms of what we think we need to fix and patch. And basically we're past the days of like shipping a game and then walking away and coming back next year and shipping another one. Things have gotten really, really compressed. And one of the things we have to do now is think about 3 years ahead so that we can plan appropriately. We can't get to August and not know what we're working on the following year. So we have kind of like a high-level creative roadmap of all the things we'd like to get to. And, every year we kind of look at those things. We have a priorities in terms of what we feel is the most important thing to go after, and we try to get that staffed. The big thing for us that where we struggle, I think, is we want so badly to make a meaningful year-over-year improvement, to basically get away from that concept of it's just a roster update and nothing meaningful has changed year-over-year. That sometimes we get overly aggressive and then we run out of time to actually what we call close it cleanly. And that's why you get some of these post-launch bugs that have been such a hot topic of discussion, because the team got so aggressive and wanting to get all the features in that they wanted that they didn't leave themselves enough runway to land the thing cleanly.
How difficult is that to balance as far as, you have this feature set that, or this wish list that's dozens, probably hundreds of things long. How do you narrow that down to just a few and decide what goes in and still leave yourself the opportunity to try to, test things to make sure they get implemented correctly?
It's probably going to go against the way you guys probably think it works, but just because I have a creative director title doesn't mean that I'm just deciding everything by myself. EA is a very big company. There's a lot of stuff going on in terms of like, what is the business initiative? What goals do we have for the MUT feature? Marketing always has their goals that they're coming in with. My kind of role as gameplay creative director, and I know a lot of the competitive community would kind of be shocked to hear this, is to represent the core, represent the simulation core, and represent the competitive core. And I am always constantly up against the pressure of a lot of people who want to widen the funnel and make the game more open to casuals. There seems to be this concept within EA that we, with the right feature and the right plan, we could expand Madden's audience by bringing in, 2 to 3 million new casual users into the ecosystem. And then there's guys like me and Clint who are like, if we make the core gamer happy, if people who play franchise and competitive Madden are happy with the game, we believe that we can grow from the inside out. But unfortunately, that's kind of like incremental growth by quality and by word of mouth. And they're kind of looking for a more of a bigger flash, a million casuals suddenly run to Madden because we've offered some new thing that they associate with. So that's kind of the pressure we have, is that every year there's this balance between we need to widen the funnel, we need to bring in new users versus, we have this backlog of hundreds of items that we know our core users wanted to get to. And a lot of the times those core things internally are looked at as too hardcore or very heavy football simulation. And they struggle to feel like they can sell those stories to a casual marketplace, especially that they always seem to have this overriding theme that the game is too complicated, that when new users come in, they struggle, they throw interceptions, they run backwards. And so they ask me to actually build features to make sure those people have a good time, where my motivation is all, I have to make my core happy. And that's kind of, a lot of game teams work this way, where that juxtaposition of different ideas and different sort of internal crusades of what we're each fighting for has to come together between myself, my executive producer, the general manager, the head of marketing, another creative director we have on the team who focuses more on stuff outside of gameplay. We all get together with our art directors, our tech directors, and talk this stuff out. And we actually play test it, and we get data, and we that's how we kind of build our strategy towards what we should work on next and what should be the priority.
It's got to be an awfully difficult position to be in. You're trying to balance your hardcore guys, your competitive guys, which are very dissimilar in a lot of ways. Although I think the core they're interested in, but then the casuals is just that's a completely different animal. And then you have a lot of people don't understand the business aspect, and EA being a publicly traded company and being about profit. I mean, that's what businesses are about, and they have a hard time understanding that. So you combine those all together and put them in a pot and kind of swirl them about and try to come out with this perfect game every year. I can imagine that's incredibly difficult.
One of my biggest frustrations, and I think during his time here, Ian Cummings, who had the job before me, kind of referenced the same feeling that some people within EA kind of feel like, well, the core gamer, the core Madden gamer, we already got them, right? They're going to come in and buy the game every year because they're core. Therefore, catering to their interest doesn't help the business. They're going to buy the game anyway. So they want to divert attention towards new markets. And it's up to me to say and basically clearly verbalize and display that the core is either, there are these flaws or they're bugs or systems that they're depending on. And the worst case scenario is, God forbid, we actually lapse out our core, where we start losing our core because we've made too many casual decisions. And so that to me is a constant challenge for me, is fighting for core features that, obviously a guy from marketing isn't going to be that football savvy, or isn't going to know what the top 10 issues that play competitive Madden even is, or why it's relevant or why it's important. And it's my job to kind of build those cases.
It makes sense, in the fact that you think you have the hardcore there, at least from the corporate standpoint, and the fact that you realize that the possibility of them walking away and getting frustrated with it is, I think a lot of people need to hear that and understand that it's a tough spot for you to be in, but you are aware of it and you're trying to balance it, and we definitely appreciate that. One of the big things that comes up is after launch, we get patches and we get tuners, and not everybody agrees with them. What can you tell us about the process as far as how you decide what goes in the patches and tuners, and maybe even what is the difference between the patch and the tuner?
All right, so let's talk about the first thing first. The difference between a patch and a tuner is generally the patch or the update involves changing code. So anytime we have to change code, that has to be patched and updated. That has to go through an extensive QA certification process and then a first-party certification process. Could take us sometimes 4 or 5 weeks to get the patches out. So an update, a tuning update, is completely different. A tuning update is basically anything we've done where the change is actually stored off as data, meaning all we're doing is going into a DB and changing a value. And we could do that without changing code, without going through first party. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last, I'd say 2 to 3 years, is taking all this code, AI code, and doing what we call converting it into data so that we can make more changes to the game in tuning updates versus having to wait for patches to fix everything. The other thing that's made this very complicated is CGD. And this is the first year where we really ran into a situation where we patched right in the middle of a tournament. And not only did we upset people and disrupt the balance of the game, but we also introduced a bug which actually showed itself in the tournament that followed the week after. So we now have to build our patch schedule around tournaments. So in between tournaments is when we want to release gameplay patches. This is all part of Madden sort of as a franchise instead of just MUT, learning how to be a continuous development model, like a live service versus a packaged good annual release. And that's a long process of evolution that we're going through. So in terms of your first question, which is how do you know when to patch? So actually next week I'm going to EA Vancouver and presenting a whole presentation on our post-launch tuning strategy, because we've won a bunch of awards over the last few years for post-launch support, and the rest of the company is interested to know what our strategy is. So I'm actually very familiar with this topic right now, and it's really interesting because what I've been doing lately, last 2 years, is we have biometrics, and biometrics is basically telemetry data that's being spit out from the game. It's giving us all kinds of stats: how many interceptions people are throwing, how many fumbles, how many yards per carry, how many yards per game, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can apply all these filters to it, and at any given time, I can kind of have a general idea of what's really going on under the hood. So what I'll do is I'll look for anomalies in that data, but primarily what drives our strategy is Twitter, because we're getting our best data fastest through social media. So what'll happen is, for example, I'll give you an example. Around the middle of September, about a few weeks after launch, I started getting this big spike about the outside run game. Stretch is overpowered. Everybody's running stretch on every play. Every play is running stretch for 6-7 yards a carry. And what I got was a big spike in the feedback. Like a lot of people simultaneously complaining about the same thing. And so what I do when I detect a spike in the feedback is I'll cross-reference the feedback with the telemetry data. And the telemetry data showed me that people were rushing for about 5.7 yards per carry. And when I filtered that out to only outside run plays, it was even higher, way above what we'd expect for a rushing average per carry. And then we looked at the game. Clint actually went in and found a bunch of bugs in the way that our force defenders were playing and their reaction time. We made a few tweaks, and all of a sudden we got that problem fixed. The rushing averages came down to 5.2. Or was it 5.2? Yeah, 5.2 from 5.8, I think. And the game, I think, came much balanced because of it. Now, this is based on real-world NFL statistics. I'm balancing yards per carry based on what I expect the NFL average should be. But the net impact of that is a bunch of gamers said, you just nerfed the run game. You just destroyed this run game. Some of them, there's a couple guys in the sim community who basically said, I'm not playing the game after this. They've completely ruined it. When I have direct telemetry statistical data that tells me that all we did is make it more realistic. But that's the risk of a patch or any update. No matter what change you make, it's going to be disruptive, even if it's a good change. Nobody complained that much when we took out the motion glitch, like when people were snapping during the motion and getting that speed boost off the line. But it was disruptive. Like a lot of people's offenses were entirely based on that. And even though everyone could recognize it's good for the game, it's still disruptive if you've spent weeks or months investing in building this offense out, and all of a sudden a patch comes out and takes it away. This is not a Madden exclusive phenomenon. I just read 32 pages of forum posts about the hook in Overwatch because they just changed a little bit of how the mechanic worked, and half the people were praising them and half the people were saying that they ruined and nerfed the mechanic. This is the way that live game production goes. You make decisions based on the data you have that you think will represent the best interests of the community, and you hope that the community embraces them. The nano detection system is a great example of a potentially very polarizing feature. We thought it was the right thing to do. We knew we ran the risk of pissing off the entire competitive community. But at the end of the day, we had to sack up and just roll the dice and see if it would work, and luckily it did. I think it's been a huge benefit to the game.
I think for the most part, you're right. I've had very few issues of the nano detection system really biting me. Occasionally, when it does, it's frustrating. But the overall point of you're never going to satisfy everybody. There's always going to be people on both sides. I think that's one thing that a lot of guys in the community kind of have to understand is that there's so many different angles that you get pulled in that it's never going to be 100% perfect for everybody. So we all kind of have to give and take on our expectations and. As long as we're moving in the right direction, which obviously we are.
Well, related to that subject, I'd like to add, because we talk about this a lot, and I actually think this is going to happen sooner rather than later. I think this year, more than any other year, we realized that with competitive gaming taking off and our franchise mode had a huge year this year. Usage in franchise was up almost 100% year over year from Madden 16 to Madden 17.
Awesome.
And so our sim community's really taken off, and our competitive community is starting to take off. And what's clear to me is that they want different things. The things that the competitive gaming, like the way they want the game to play, is different from how the simulation guys want the game to play. And until Madden allows you to have unique settings for simulation and competitive, we're at a huge disadvantage, which means when we make changes or tuning changes, we have to make them globally across all audience segmentations. And that's a huge disadvantage to me because I can't sort of pick and choose specific tuning parameters to apply to a competitive tuning set and specific tuning parameters to apply to a simulation tuning set, basically being able to serve the needs of both communities individually versus a one-size-fits-all approach. And so I think having split settings like NHL does is something that Madden absolutely has to get to in the very near future.
I know some people that are going to be very happy to hear you say that, so hopefully they'll tune in.
What I'd like is for them to be more than happy. I want them to hear it and then say, this is what my ideal version of simulation or competitive settings looks like, and then list off a bunch of bullets like it should be this, 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 and this, because we think we have a pretty good handle on what the communities want, but without you guys speaking up and telling us, we're not going to get this completely right. So it's really important that everyone speaks up and tells us, this is what I expect from this type of setting.
So if somebody was going to do that, what specific would you want to see them send you as far as?
I'll give you an example. For me, like an example in, let's say CFM, one thing I would look at is like quarterback accuracy is a theme this year. So in CFM, they're like, hey, quarterback accuracy should fall off more by rating than it does right now. That's something I hear a lot from the sim community and I actually agree with. Now, the reason, the competitive community doesn't like that is if I make an open read and throw the ball to a receiver who's open, I expect the ball to go there. The user did everything right. The ball should hit that receiver. Now, a simulation gamer will say, well, what's that quarterback's rating? If that's Geno Smith back there, that should only be accurate this percentage of the time. So that's an example of two completely different needs. And what we want communicated to us is the simulation community saying, I expect lower tier quarterbacks to miss X percentage of their throws, just like the NFL. Whereas a competitive player would say, if I have a receiver who's open and I make the right read, I never should overthrow that receiver. And just by expressing and verbalizing the kind of like, this is what we want, it'll help us inform that tuning or that feature model.
Playing off of that, if that was the case for like a mode like MUT, if that's what they're asking for, what would the difference between a gold Geno Smith and say a 99 Tom Brady be if they're never going to miss open passes?
Yeah, I think then we'd have to then relook at that stuff and then say, well, then does it come down to like something like throw power, where it's more about like it takes longer for him to get the ball out or for the ball to get there? Like we'd have to rethink some of those things. But again, this is kind of the new pressure that's on us, because for the last 4 years of me having this job, I've been sim. And I've said it a million times. My direction for this game over the last 4 years has been pure simulation. And now I'm realizing with CGD taking off that I have to account for the things that the competitive gamers want. And so now we have to sort of rethink the way Madden is going to be tuned for those gamers. And that starts with understanding from the community what they expect.
Gotcha. Another thing that's really big that comes up is people will look at a game like NFL 2K5, and they'll say, well, this stuff was in NFL 2K5. Why isn't it in Madden now? Obviously, that was 2 generational systems ago. I know you've been working on games for a while. I know you were in Austin, so that might have been actually around the time that 2K5 came out. I don't know if I have my dates correct, but you've been programming for a while. Explain to guys why programming for the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox is completely different for the PS4 and the Xbox One.
Oh, geez.
And as simple as you can make it.
It's actually not as complicated as it seems. A lot of stuff has to do with foundational technology. And so when people look at, animation in Madden and they complain about the way players move, right? That is kind of like deep rooted in the EA animation system engine. And you can find similar flaws in other EA games. So some issues like that, where you're like, why does the game always look so stiff in motion? Or, some of that stuff is really buried in the core foundational technology. And for someone like me, I'll give you an example. Our front end, all those screens that you go through to navigate through the front end and all those menus and stuff, it's exorbitantly expensive for us to build, and it takes a long time for us to change anything. So you imagine you come in and you're like, yes, we should rip out the whole front end system and rebuild a new one that's faster and easier to work with and save us a ton of money. And everyone's like, that's a fantastic idea. And then you realize you're going to spend 3 years just porting all the screens you have to the new system and make nothing new just to get back to where you were to absorb this new technology. And that's why a lot of these times, the option to go back and rip out some fundamental piece of code and then rebuild some new technology in its place means that the entire game changes because everything's connected to that foundational piece of technology. So we have to be very careful with these things because we can't absorb a year turnaround on some of these items because they're too big. So we have to do this staged implementation process where if we want to go after something like that, like ripping out, for example, what I had referenced earlier, all the AI systems being in code, now moving to data. I'm 3 years into that process, and we still have probably 2 more years to go before we've gotten all the AI systems move over to data side. And that's a cost that I have to eat every year that I get zero value for and won't get any value for until we kind of, finish that thread.
It's an exquisitely intricate and complicated process.
But I'll give you a simple example that'll make sense to you. Let's say your company gives you a Christmas bonus, right? And they're like, okay, here's 20 grand. And you go home to your wife and you say, babe, we got 20 grand. What do you want to do with it? I really want to put in a hot tub. And she's like, well, I think a hot tub would be great. And that definitely seems like we got a lot of use out of it, whatever. But our roof is leaking. And we've needed to repair the roof for the last 10 years. And we got to do it. And you're like, all of my $20,000 is going to repair this roof. I get no benefits from that. I can't really enjoy it. It's just something I have to do and have to eat. Now, the right decision there is to repair your roof, not put in a jacuzzi. And that's kind of like these decisions are. It's really obvious what the right decision is, but a lot of times it's painful because you're not getting any immediate benefit to your user by going that direction.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people don't understand that is, you guys work on budgets and you work within expectations, and having to manage that and, go with the unpopular things and trying to fix things and rebuild things is a lot bigger part of the long-term process than a lot of people want to understand, and plays a big role in why some of the things that, they want in don't necessarily get in. I know you're busy and we'll let you go. I just wanted to wrap up with a couple quick following questions. What's the one thing that you've done either this year or even in the few years that you've been with EA that you're most proud of that you guys have accomplished?
There's I think for me personally, it would have to be kind of where we're at in terms of achieving my vision for simulation football. We still have a long way to go, but when I look back and think about where the game was around about Madden 25, Madden 13 versus where it is and the number of things we've been able to add, I think just overall the volume of the progress, and that's everything from seeing our Metacritic score go up 8 points to watching the sales go up in a business that had been flat for almost 10 years, watching the community grow, the birth of the competitive gaming division. I mean, it's really, when you're in my kind of role and you have sort of, a lot of oversight over the entire franchise, you take your wins at more of a global franchise level versus a feature level. And so it's more been about the success that the franchise has had over the past 2 to 3 years. And I know there's a lot of people on Twitter spouting like Madden is dead or MUT is dead, but trust me, I see statistics and I see data that tells me that quite the opposite is true. People are engaging longer and longer into the year than they've ever had before with Madden. The CFM use is up. MUT use is up. I'm really proud of the growth of the community, I think, more than anything else.
I would definitely agree with that. It can be frustrating at times, but I've found myself more engaged in this Madden than any other one previous, and that's definitely.
Let me tell you something. Madden will always be frustrating, and let me tell you why I think that is. Even if you play a perfect game of Madden, Madden represents usually like a 35 to 40 minute investment. And in my experience, a lot of Madden games play fairly close. And so it's a pretty significant time investment. Madden also has this other piece that a lot of games don't have, which is the strategy layer. The concept that no matter how good you are on your sticks, your opponent can outthink you at the play call level and at the adjustment level. And I think that kind of levels the playing field a little bit versus a game you could just button mash and maybe hope to compete. So I think in a lot of ways, people will point to the dice rolls and the random flukes and stuff like that as being the most frustrating element. But really, if you think about it, most of us, when we play Madden, we get sweaty palms. There's some intrinsic reaction that you have physically when you play Madden that is different from a lot of other games. That's why they call Madden games sweaty sometimes, because you are so emotionally invested that, any turn or flip of the dice that's going to go against you is going to make you rage. It's just how it is. I get it, man. I've been playing this game for 20 years.
Yeah, I have too. And actually, you've seen some of my stuff. I figure out sometimes afterwards, I'm like, okay, I could have done this or I could have done that. And you're right. You can get caught up in the emotion of the game at the time and not always think as clearly as you could. Last question. What is the one thing that you can tell us that you haven't been able to get done, maybe the way you wanted it, or even implemented at all? I know you can't really tell us what's coming down the pipeline, but what's something that's kind of stuck with you that you didn't really get that the way I wanted to, or we haven't got it in yet that you're kind of sticks with you a little bit?
There's so much. A great example last year would be the new zones. To only be able to get to the underneath zones and not the deep zones was a massive miss in my eyes. I look at something like the swerve, and Mike scraped the year before that as misses. There are things that made it into the game that basically went viral and kind of ruined the game for people. And I consider those personal failures on my plate as well as my team, that we weren't able to find those things in alpha and get them fixed. Now, I'd probably say another one. I still don't know what I would have done differently, but the aggressive catch and the way that went down, we were so proud of that feature going into that launch year of Madden 16, and we thought the multiplayer catch outcomes were going to be a massive breakthrough, and people were going to be like, oh my God, wide receivers and DBs are fighting for the ball. This is amazing. The way that people reacted to the aggressive catch was completely caught me off guard, and I don't think anyone in here saw that coming. And so I was surprised by that, and then I felt like we didn't react quickly enough. We kind of left it being a frustrating, contentious, polarizing thing all year long. I hate shipping features that we worked on all year long and then they turn out to be polarizing. That's probably where I feel like we fail. I think if we're going to spend time on something and spend months on it, it better be the kind of thing that the majority of the community says this was good for the game. And in some cases, like with the aggressive catch, it was too 50-50 for my liking, too polarizing.
Right. Well, I think it's been balanced a lot now, and we see it a lot more where people are liking it, and it feels more realistic. I thank you for your time. It was a great insight into a lot of things that go on, and hopefully it helps some people understand a little bit of what you go through and how difficult your job is, and how much you actually do look at what we do and what we say and try to get it in there. So we definitely thank you for that, and hopefully we can catch up again as we get closer to the release of Madden 18.
All right, Mike, have a good night.
All right, thanks, you too. Thank you for listening to another episode of the PX1 Sports Radio Podcast. For more, you can find us on Twitter at PX1 Sports or online at px1sports.com. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.